Welcome to episode 52 of Quarantime, the Holiday Spectacular. How do you celebrate the holidays in what has to be one of the strangest years of our lives? A year when we're looking forward and looking backward, and a year when we're asking, what are we going to be building kind of next in our future? One of the best traditions in San Francisco for celebrating the holidays is something called Lost Landscapes. It is an annual showing at the Castro Theater of film clips of the history of San Francisco, of ephemeral memories, home movies and industrial films, things that are our past that remind us of who we are and help us think about our tomorrows. And today, we're going to welcome to our show Rick Prelinger, who is the creator of that show and the curator of so much ephemeral film and stories in America. And we're going to ask the question, how is it that accidental films, industrial films, home movies, films that go back 100 years, both tell our stories and are the mechanisms we might be using to imagine our future economies, our good ideas, our bad ideas, all of the fights that are in America about, do we go progressive? Do we go business? How do we expand? They're all captured in stories we told ourselves that are funny and informative, and we get to play in that sandbox today. Welcome, Rick.
Thank you, Peter. What an honor to be in the holiday show.
This is so great. And also joining us, and we'll be coming back to us later, but let's say hello to her now, is Lisa Hurwitz, who is a practitioner in this film. Lisa, you have a film coming up on the history of the automat, an institution of America in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, but an idea that may be coming back. What got you on to looking to the past to make a film?
Well, I was a 35 millimeter film projectionist in college, and I was watching so many amazing independent films. I just got really into cafeteria history, eating in my school cafeteria all the time. And then I discovered the automat. And so I kind of combined my two interests, film and then cafeterias, and then came the automat documentary.
I mean, what's fascinating here is how people's strange interests get them into this. Rick, you and I met in the 1980s, the year before I went to Apple, but it was in business school, and I had a summer internship at Atari in New York. But I had just built a museum wing in DC on the future of communications, and so I was completely interested in the history of fairs. And then I met you in the 80s. You had started collecting all of these films that came from AT&T and General Motors. What's the history of the Prelinger archive and this piece of Americana that you have?
Oh gosh, in a few sentences, I was helping out with a documentary film. My housemates had made the documentary Atomic Cafe, which was extremely successful. And they got money from Norman Lear to make another one called Heavy Petting, about sexuality and romance in the post-World War II period. And they hired me as research director. And the first problem was, how do you make a film about sexuality and romance? What do you look at? Do you look at feature films? Do you look at porn? And I realized that actually what was interesting was the films that told us how to behave, how to be, how to be good boys and good girls, good men and good women. And so I got sucked into the vortex of educational and industrial cinema. This is huge. In those days, there were maybe, 150,000 features in existence. This was before everybody made a feature as part of their coming of age. And there were 500,000 industrial and advertising and educational films. And so I put together a little collection for the production. And then the production went on hiatus, as all good productions do. And I started collecting, and the archives was born. I had a platform bed, and I piled films under the rim of my bed. And when my bedroom got too crowded, I rented a little room in Chinatown, near where I lived in New York. And then when that got too crowded, I moved to the meat market. And I think that's where we met, Peter. That's right. I had a studio in the meat market in the same space that is now occupied by Palantir.
And today, if we're interested in your archives, you can go onto the Internet Archives and type in World's Fair or Automat or Dayton, and you'll find the stuff. And back then, there were reels, and if you were really interested, then you had to transfer it over to Umatic, and then a client would use it. And you and I first started collaborating professionally when I was at Apple running a lot of our U.S. marketing, and we would use old footage to get skeptical audiences kind of make them more comfortable by using kind of funny old footage of old technology. And we tell new stories with old footage. And I did a similar project for Bill Gates. The first time he had to go to Warren Buffett's conference, he's like, they won't understand me. I'll look like a geek. What do I do? And I said, well, just make fun of yourself. Just say, you don't know all the answers either. So we did a film on how the history of the 20th century was the history of new forms of media that people either got right or not right. So we used old footage of radios, talk about Windows for radio wasn't such a great hit. And it was great, right? Because this stuff resonates.
I'd love to see that one sometime.
Oh, did I not show you that? I'll send you that. Maybe we'll even show it at the end of the day today because we
there
have
you go.
Here. Yeah. Okay. Hey, to get started, why don't we do this? Why don't we go back into the archives and pick a really interesting moment in time for this industrial stuff. In the 1930s, the U.S. was trying to convince itself that capitalism would work. There was a lot of concern that the New Deal was socialist, and you had a lot of New Deal films that were lefty coming out, and a lot of corporations that trying to tell their story. Into that ferment comes General Motors, and this first film we're going to look at is called Master Hands, which seems to be about General Motors celebrating its employees. What's the background for what we're about to see here?
Master Hands is an industrial symphony. There's almost no words in it. It shows a car being made from the first few moments in a foundry until it drives off the assembly line. And it's an elemental film. It's earth, air, fire, and water. The music is all remix of Wagner. Interestingly enough, 1936, you know what other films were made that year? Modern Times, about the assembly line and Charlie Chaplin caught on the assembly line, and Triumph of the Will, Leni Riefenstahl's fascist epic. And there's aspects of Master Hands that remind me of both, but it's, why it's a great film, actually. You're right, Peter, it celebrates mass production. It celebrates the designers, the engineers of the system. But at the same time, and it ennobles the workers, but at the same time, it shows how freaking dangerous that job is. You've got people, welding with bare hands. You've got people standing in the middle of machines, in the middle of huge robots. You have people working in the foundry with molten steel with very little protection. So like all great industrial films, it says one thing and it shows something quite different.
Yes, I remember that point. So when today I was editing and doing shorter clips, the selection we're about to see maximizes really dangerous places workers' hands are. So Omid, let's go ahead and take a look at Master Hands. And then in the middle of it, the volume comes down. We can talk about it a little. This is a real celebration of work and the pride that these workers have in it. I mean, that seems to be one thing that comes through, particularly from the context of today when we talk about manufacturing receding.
The other thing that's going on is this is shot in mid-36. At that time, the UAW is trying to organize all the Chevy plants. And you can, with a fair measure of accuracy, you can assume that 1 out of every 10 workers you see is a spy for the company. and getting a little extra in their paycheck in return for informing on union organizers. So it's not an innocent environment.
Sounds like the Trump administration.
Everybody tattling on one another.
I love that Wagner, as the car is manufactured and goes away there.
It's the foundry of the gods.
So we mentioned this stuff is going on in the time of the New Deal. I think one of the interesting framings here is that as New Deal ideas were being deployed, there was a lot of selling that had to be done, and a lot of filmmakers were employed to sell those ideas. So, for example, the city, which was shown at the World's Fair in 1939, was selling garden cities. Pare Lorentz was selling projects in Appalachia and stuff like that. And we're about to take a look at a couple of clips here. But film was an important. These films were used a lot, I think, weren't they, to kind of get Americans to understand and support this stuff?
Film was a way, I think, of touching everybody's life. You didn't need a college degree to appreciate a film, to be touched by the film, but you could have one. You didn't have to read, and there were all kinds of networks to get films seen. And so, yeah, it was considered the most powerful means of persuasion. Next to that would be radio.
And it's an interesting thing today to consider these tasks. I was on the phone yesterday with Nan Whaley, who's the mayor of Dayton. The show we're doing a week from today. Oh, by the way, we're going to have to, in a moment, recognize the fact that this is the holiday show, because it's, Lisa, you're in New York and the candles have been lit there. In fact, we should probably recognize this right now. It's dark in New York now.
Yes, it got dark in New York so extremely early, but I held off on lighting the candles until, I would have hated for them to have been all melted by the time the show started. So this was for us.
Very cinematic of you. Very cinematic of you. Okay, so in a couple of weeks ago, Mayor Peduto in Pittsburgh announced a big initiative, a Marshall Plan for the Upper Midwest. Could a whole bunch of cities, 8 cities, get together and actually transition from a fossil economy to a green economy? This means bringing a lot of people in older industries along and believing there's a future industry. It means enough investment to pick people up, and it means convincing Americans in a cynical time that a big idea is possible. And in listening to what they're trying to do, my mind kept coming back to what the cell job must have been in the 30s and what we can learn from that. So let's take a look at a couple of clips. This is a really interesting one. The first one we're going to look at is Valley Town, and this is about a Pennsylvania town facing automation in 1940. Let's take a look at that. I think there's just music here, so maybe Rick, tell us a little bit about Willard Van Dyke and this picture.
Yeah, Willard Van Dyke had made The City for the New York World's Fair right around the same time, and this film was commissioned by the Sloan Foundation. Alfred Sloan was chairman of GM, and had created both employment and unemployment, and wanted to figure out a future for the economy. And Valley Town proposed certain kinds of futures for reemployment and for fixing the economy. But, Sloan didn't like it, and they actually recut the film to be a little less gloomy. So it was very contentious film in its time. And then by the time this film came out in 1940, there was already a great deal of war business. So steel was back up again. So Newcastle, Pennsylvania, where this film was made, had a temporary revival. But after World War II, it drifted back into decline. But this image to me of workers watching the smokestacks of the plant they worked in falling down, that's such an eloquent image. This is 80 years ago, and we've seen this so many times in the Midwest since then, haven't we?
Right. I mean, this film could have been any of the films that were part of the 2016 campaign and what was going on in Youngstown and all of that stuff. When I was talking to Nan in Dayton, one of the things she was pointing out is that, a lot of the Midwest feels that the rest of America looks down on them, and they derive so much honor from work. And a lot of the task she thinks going forward in proposing next economic proposals is to kind of, she said, we don't want universal income. We need to show honor and work. And it's interesting that GM film and this film are trying to do that and also propose economic futures. Did this film successfully propose an interesting economic future?
Not really, because, the sponsor and the filmmaker disagreed. And so it ended up being like a committee work, and it was diffuse. It didn't have a clear message. Do you remember a few years ago, and I guess it was 2012 or 13, Clint Eastwood narrated those Chrysler commercials made imported from Detroit? Yeah. That was a very, very powerful, I guess it was made by Wyden and Kennedy up in Portland. That was a very powerful sort of image in this tradition of coming back from depression. There's a long, somebody should make a feature film about economic, trying to pep up America. There's this next film you're going to show, I think is a great example.
Well, that's correct. So another great tradition in America is heralding American exceptionalism, and always throughout the 20th century, the American way, the capitalist way, and that connection between economic capitalism, personal liberty, and freedom. Mm-hmm. But why take my word or your word or Lisa's word for it when we have perhaps the greatest example of exuberant American exceptionalism in this clip from, it's called Let's Go America, right? Yeah, it's called
Let's Go America.
Yeah.
Fasten your seatbelts.
This is our holiday gift to our people.
Or fasten your buggy, it looks like.
Totally.
Wow, let's go America.
Developed because of this nation's imperishable heritage of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is this that has given us all of the industrial progress that we have achieved in the past and a certainty of progress in the future. A certainty as long as this great gift of liberty, individual liberty to grow greater and better, is valued and protected. You are descendants of pioneers, but you are also pioneers. Opportunities still rise from every smokestack, every test tube, every laboratory, every workshop in the land. You have come a long way from the drudgery of the blacksmith shop and the more wealth for all in the years to come. The test tube science holds television, the wings of tomorrow, new types of houses, air conditioning, streamlined trains. Numbered things will be developed because of this nation's imperishable heritage of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is this that has given us all of the industrial progress that we've achieved in the past and a certainty of progress in the future. A certainty as long as this great gift of liberty, individual liberty to grow greater and better, is valued and protected.
Okay, several great things there. First of all, the style of writing back then, whether it's Norman Corwin's writing or what Lewis Mumford wrote for The City, there was a staccato cadence to these things that is at once ancient but very powerful.
It's the radio, it's the radio commentators would add drama to the news as a way of giving the simple words of a news bulletin, a narrative arc, and a sense of drama. I think that's where it's coming from. Appealing, and the ear is, of course, much more powerful than the eye, as we know. And the eye is just those montages dissolving into one another. It's very abstract, isn't it? It's arty. It's a diffuse promise, but it sure looks nice.
I was I was happy to hear you talk about the city a bit, since that was a film that is fair use, of course, and we used a bit in the automat as well.
Yeah, the city, which we're not showing here, but that's also fits in this whole narrative of films about progress. I mean, that's another very interesting thing to point out here, which is as we headed into the Depression, a lot of business interests wanted to tell the story about progress so that we didn't go into socialism or fascism and workers could hang on. And this is what led to the 1939 World's Fair and arguably the 64 World's Fair and Walt Disney's pushing of progress, and a big part of, I think, our American story. And probably part of the reason that we're in a bad mood now is we don't have a singular vision of what progress looks like. But that litany of there's going to be television and there's going to be radios, you're going to have a washing machine was a big part of the consumerism of that era.
It's kind of
Zoom.
That's right, the glowing rectangle. The future as a I used to call it a utopia appropriated, because we all have utopian feelings. We all want a better future, and we imagine different ways that it might happen. But it's kind of like medication. Corporations bring it up, and the government will bring it up at a time when there's discontent, and either people are hurting, or perhaps maybe they're a little spoiled. Perhaps people are a little caught up in affluenza and they need a break from the everyday. And this is a vision, it's not a very real vision. I mean, and it's always very specific. Like your future, AT&T will bring you a very specific kind of future. Microsoft will bring you another future. MasterCard will bring you yet another. It's all these kind of colliding utopias that never quite get very specific. And once you get your new iPhone in 2 years, they create a new need and you get another one. I see it as kind of almost like a pill in a way. It's an antidote to kind of enemy, distress, anger, maybe. I
would, having been one of those guys in corporations doing this,
nothing personal.
Yeah, no, but this is so. When I was at Apple, we would occasionally make corporate films to explain our vision of things, and this was before the internet, and before if you had an idea, you could just mock it up and ship it as an app as quickly as you could make a video about it. And in 1987, we did a film called Now. By the way, I realize there's a whole other show in this stuff of that's coming out here.
Yeah, no, really, I can't wait.
But we did a film called Knowledge Navigator, which was Apple's vision of what the world would look like basically now when you had tablets and AI and you could draw things and have video conferencing and the inferences could be drawn. And it was a lovely, it was a very funny, it was a great vision of the future. It had an agent named Phil, a little white guy with a bow tie. But people were talking about climate change and what happened after, and we did it because you couldn't build that stuff then, but we did want to explain to people what we had in mind and get some thought leadership.
Was this an Alan Kay project?
Yeah, he was involved in it. And then immediately after that, every tech company wanted to make their version of the same film. AT&T wanted to do it. But they couldn't make that film, so they went for a different production design. Theirs featured more African Americans and Hispanic people and softer focus, right? So it was basically they went more ethnic. Then Bill Gates, when I left Apple, wanted me to make one of those. And I could neither be more politically correct nor just do the science. So we went for film noir. And in the first scene, we bump a guy off in the docks. And it becomes a mystery because people are getting bumped off. So the same film, we just apply different techniques to talk about things. But I have a question. You have the cynical approach of us telling stories about the future. You could also say that at a time when people believe there is one, that is to say, I don't know, believe in progress or believe that industry is going to do great things, or even in today's case, some belief that you could actually thread the needle, have sustainable manufacturing, sustainable food, and make the economy work. Like if people believe that there's a solution to the problem.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. My bug about corporate utopias is just that they're not about, they're about corporate agency, and we need to talk about ordinary people's agency.
Yeah.
This is what makes the world better when regular people, not just elites, feel like they too can play a part, and that's my bug.
Yeah.
And you know, when you get like World War II propaganda, and I've got my issues with that too, but American World War II propaganda is all about you play a role. It's up to you. You know, what you do is going to affect the future. So it's a different story. But it isn't so much about, hey, something great is coming down the pike, and start raising your credit limit so you can buy it.
This is a really interesting point. Take the case of a World's Fair. World's Fairs, of course, were always top down. It's what the generals thought, what General Motors and General Electric thought, right?
That's a good way of putting it.
If you were to do it today, you would love it to be crowdsourced, right? You'd love the best ideas from the best incubators, and middle schoolers in Newark are coming up with ideas, and they're talking to people at CERN, and they're experimenting things. So
that's kind of what the internet has been at its best, isn't it?
Yes, and one of the nice things that Walt Disney did was command our attention and tell a story, and GM had the market power. Today with the internet, you know, you have the forces of all that crap you hear every day about the conspiracy, and then there's people working on interesting futures, and it barely breaks through. So the person in me who thinks through how you can use epic storytelling or the power of games or what these films used to do to engage people in co-creating their future. I don't know quite how you solve for that. It seems like the right task.
You have to be able to interrupt the flow of noise somehow. The world is so noisy. And even now when we're at home and we can't go out to distract ourselves. Other people can't distract us from that stream of static. We need to get back that sense that we need to be able to interrupt the cacophony somehow. So a good work of art or a good work of advertising or marketing or persuasion would help us do that. But I really come back to this thing about people's individual agency.
Yeah.
It's so important. It's deeply ingrained in American consciousness. It's probably in some ways at the root of Lisa's film. The idea that you put a quarter, into a slot and turn a knob and food pops out at you. You're using your hands, You, in a sense, are helping produce your meal. You get that food comes to you personally. I think it's the agency. I mean, I'm sure you got into this psychology when you were making this film. It's such a winning idea.
I feel like winning idea is kind of, it's so true. It resonates with people for this kind of unexplainable yet explainable reason, and agency is such a huge part of it. It was really something where people felt like they were a part of it, and that was really exciting, especially for someone who was a child to be, doing something for themselves for the first time. I feel a little starstruck to be in your company, Rick. You're kind of like this elusive figure. I feel like it's kind of, I can't even believe we nailed you down here, and everyone can look at Rick finger.
Hey, I tweet. I gram. I'm not so elusive.
I'm curious, I sort of always thought that I thought you had to be older, because in order for you to part with your collection, it must have been that you were later in life. But I'm shocked that you're not older right now. What motivated you to part with your massive collection?
You mean to put it online for free?
Well, I mean, but didn't you also kind of make a deal with the government?
we all make our deals with the government. No, yeah. So in '02, and it took 6 years, honestly. I was just worried. There's this huge collection in New York, with 100,000 cans of film in the meat market and storage all over the country. And I was worried I'd step in front of a bus or something. What would happen? Who would take care of this? Because film is demanding. It's like a neurotic cat or having a lot of kids or something. It demands a lot of care and conservation. And so I wanted to find a long-term home. So yeah, went to Library of Congress. And since then, connected with Internet Archive and built a free online collection. And honestly, that was because I was annoyed that there was so little access to historical film that you had to pay everybody.
Out of sheer curiosity, and I would have done what you did, probably. But if you had done what everyone else does and sell your stuff to Getty or these other places, like, how different would everything look in your pocket and then for everyone else out there?
I would probably be richer, but I would be bored. I'd be more bored. Getty reps us for stock footage, but you can get it for free too, at archive.org, which is very cool. That archive's going to be 20 years old in 2 weeks. Our online archives. There's very few online collections that are 20 years old, and it was the most amazing thing I ever did. It changed my life. You become partners with, we got to know each other. You become partners with like hundreds of thousands of people around the world who get to use your stuff. It's opened up so many doors. I get stopped in airports. People say, thanks for the archives. But enough about me.
Well, I will say that there is some of Rick's footage in the automat, which I considered whether to get it from Internet Archive or Getty, because it would have maybe been, Getty might have had it in higher res, but in the end, Getty couldn't find it in higher res, so we went with Internet Archives. But yeah.
No worries.
Lisa, so I think you might need to explain to the audience what an automat is, because some of us may never have been to Horn and Hardart.
Yeah, tell us about the automat. Did you ever go? Did you ever go, Lisa? Have you seen one in real life?
No, so the last one closed when I was 1 year old.
Unfair.
I know it's super unfair, because I really would have liked, if they were still around, I'd be there like every day. They'd really be my jam. So an automat, it's not a place, a dumpling shop in Brooklyn or a vending machine burger place in the village. It's a Horn and Hardart. It's an old time diner-like but cafeteria environment that's really large, where the walls are lined with these vending machines, and the tables are made of marble, and the glass is Carrara, and they felt really refined. And you could go there, and for a nickel, you could get some food, and you could hang out there all day and have free water, and you could make yourself free tomato soup with ketchup and hot water.
People would make lemonade with a lemon. They had free lemons. People would,
It was just it was a place where people could go hang out, and in a nice place. And these proliferated in New York City for many decades, and they were also in Philadelphia. Although in Philadelphia Horn and Hardart was more popular for their restaurants, but in New York City, Horn and Hardart and automats were really synonymous, and they were a tourist attraction. If you went to New York City, you could go to the Empire State Building, the Statue of Liberty, the automat, and they were a place that really fascinated people on many levels.
It was that early self-service thing. Like when ATM machines came out, people thought, no, you're going to want to go see a person. But no, actually, people rather push a button. And we have all this self-service stuff today. And it was kind of like was there something about not having to deal with people that made it popular?
Well, historians tell me that people liked to not have to tip, and they did like not to have to deal with waiters, and women in particular liked not having to deal with waiters. But I don't know. I really my gut instinct is that people like to interact with other people, which is why I think all of these automat comeback fads are just temporary, because that's not what the Horn and Hardart automat was about. It really was about an experience and socializing with other people and hanging out. Although some people did, go in and out and they made it fast, but I think it was not so much about not having to interact with people. I think it was about the novelty of the technology and about the space that they provided people.
And for me, as a little kid going in, it was like an encounter with the past too. It was like my grandma's reality. It was already really.
This is true. It may be where you and I learned that tech nostalgia was an interesting mechanism, right? Because we were growing up in a piece of tech nostalgia in New York.
Because you sure didn't go for the food.
Yeah. But, it was an experience. It was almost like the same reason you went to go see a movie in the theater as opposed to because
right. Radio City. Why you go to Radio City?
Yeah.
Anyway,
speaking of America and her development throughout its 200 and some odd years, the next thing we have coming up here, as we kind of move from the Depression era into America in the suburbs, in the city, in that film that told us that we needed garden cities and our cities were dirty. We spent a lot of money in the Depression era selling us on the suburbs, right? That's when we're going to sell people on roads and FHA and loans, and redlining was part of that. There was a whole set of films that sold us the suburbs, Rick, and you've actually, I think, done films and books on this topic.
Yeah, suburbia starts. I mean, it goes back, of course, to the 1870s when cities were dirty and dangerous. Brooklyn Heights used to be a suburb. But in the 30s, cities, there was this sense, let's go out, let's expand, let's get away from disease. Of course, it was driven by class and race to probably the greatest degree. But after World War II, we haven't built any houses in the United States to speak of between 1930 and 1945 because of the Depression and the war. And there's this huge pent-up demand for housing, and it's all built out in the periphery. And suddenly it's this market of people, who need kids stuff. They need TV sets. They need washing machines. They eat a lot. They have gardens. They have 2 cars. And so this huge market. And there's this really wonderful film made for Redbook magazine to promote the suburban market, to say to advertisers, hey, we know how to reach these people. They're the people who today are leaving New York City and moving to, Montclair or up the river, This is a neat film. I think you're going to show in the suburbs next or shortly.
Yeah, this is the Redbook film.
Yeah, it was made by a production company in Princeton where like avant-garde artists work. It's a really unusual film. It's made by a woman under a gender-neutral pseudonym because a lot of sponsors wouldn't let women make industrial films. They didn't think women knew how to do that. But this was made by a genius named Virginia Bell, an unsung genius. Check it out. It's very cool.
Let's do it.
The full version.
What Redbook means by its young adults. People in a certain living situation with particular interests and particular goals. So hardly realizing it, they come into their purchasing stage and are off on a wild, non-stop ride. It's a happy-go-spending whirl, reflected in the windows of the suburban shopping centers where they go to buy. Redbook has been studying shopping centers because the people who created the suburbs are young adults, and the shopping centers are built in their image. The The shopping centers see these young adults as people whose homes are always in need of expansion. People who buy in large quantities and truck it away in their cars. It's a big market. To help people find their cars, the centers have enlisted the children. These young adults, shopping with the same determination that led them to the suburbs in the first place, are the goingest part of a nation on wheels. Living by the automobile, the first young adults in the age of the push button. Since these young adults seem to be able to outlast children, they stash them away at a neighbor's house and go back to the center for more.
Did you say that this is a part of the city?
No.
No, but it's interesting to look at it next to the city. By the way, that's a really good programming idea.
Yeah.
No, this was made in 1957 to
Right.
promote, for ad salespeople in Redbook. They would tote a projector probably and go to advertisers. Watch the full film online if you're interested. It mixes color and black and white and motion and static and sound and silent. It's kind of an amazing film, and it also talks about people's opinion about like social issues, about the civil rights movement, about communism, about labor. It's got a serious side to it too. It's a great film.
Do you think the filmmakers had any sense of irony as they were writing this?
Absolutely. It's filled with self-deprecating irony. It's filled with like little in-jokes. You're catching it. It's totally right. It's very woke.
Was the audience catching it?
I don't know. I think people in advertising and publishing were always a little bit meta and cynical. It's kind of there's a knowing glance in it.
The same elite view of the suburbs, that city versus suburb stuff that I guess have been going on all along. That's
which is gone now, right? Because the city is affluent and the suburbs are working class, right? For the most part.
Well, and it's interesting this year because COVID has given the suburbs a resurgence, right? And the near-in suburbs, the real estate's up. They're all worried about getting gentrified now. And yet the subject of this film is not picking up that draft. The shopping center, a lot of adaptive reuse of shopping centers.
That's Stonestown, the one you saw where people go to dance in the mall at night. Can you imagine going to the mall to dance at night? That's astonishing. That's my mall in San Francisco.
Yes, the idea that the set of things that organically happen in a city could be replicated in the mall. By the way, that utopian idea still exists, right? People still want to kind of cram it all into some programmed space. But yeah, that was kind of that was great. But did that really go on, or did they stage that, do you think?
Oh, I think it really happened in the early days of malls. Remember, there was nothing else to do out there. Either you watched TV or you went out to the mall.
There were the old March of Time films, which were being done in that era, did a great job of documenting America coming home from the wall. Did you remember a film called Nightclub Boom?
Oh, Nightclub Boom's awesome. Yeah. I love all that. I love There's a great one on superstition, the March of Time, on what Americans believe, that has all these people doing bizarre, ritualistic. They had a great sense of humor. March of Time.
Yeah.
The caviar of the newsreels, as we call them.
In today's dollars, what do you think these filmmakers doing newsreels made back then?
So that's a great question. If you had to get an industrial film made back in the day, let's say 50s, early 60s, typically it cost a company about $1,000 a minute to get a film made. And the people that worked on these films were probably making about as much money as a content strategist for, a big web service might, not as much as an engineer. So, you know, a
Pretty
decent,
good
yeah, an okay living.
Okay, all right.
Lisa, in this progress, when the reason we brought up the city was, well, there was the city, and it basically said the city sucks, go to the suburbs. So now we had the flick on the suburbs. Of course, the next thing we're going to need to do is build more highways, which was another great project of the 50s. And Rick, you made a point to me earlier that we here in California just got through Prop 22, in which Uber and Lyft spent hundreds of millions of dollars to convince our government to go make things better for those companies. Does that have any historical precedent?
Yeah, in Prop 22, the so-called rideshare companies tried to get their employees and tried to get the public to convince, the government to let them work with gig labor. And the same thing happened in 1954. So we had a terrible highway system in the United States. We've been trying to get an interstate highway system built since before World War II. The plans were all, made in the 30s, believe it or not. They look just the same as what they built. But the time came in the 50s, and what they had to do is figure out how to get the gasoline tax to apply to road building. And so General Motors and the tire companies and the oil companies all coordinated this campaign to get citizens to advocate for better highways. And this film that we're going to look at, there you go, give yourself the green light. It was made in 1954, and it was a successful lobby. And in 1956, the money was freed up, and Kansas started building the first interstates. The first interstate was built outside Lawrence, Kansas, right after the law was passed.
So GM needed to build a very subtle film to subtly persuade America, and here it is.
Subtle with a sledgehammer.
It's boom.
This is Agony Alley. Morning rush and evening wait. Fight your way home from work. You think you got it made. Good job, car nearly paid for. So you get a little home in the suburbs, away from the city smoke, out from the shadows of the factory, into the sun and clean air. Every night it takes longer to get home, wasting more time in gasoline. No wonder everybody's acting so nervous. What's a citizen gonna do?
Our American dream of Futurama on wheels can come true. Our highway engineers know the way. It's ours for the asking, if we'll ask and pay our way. Freedom of the road is as old as the first man and as new as this moment. Once we fought for it, through forest and river, wild animals and Indians, across desert and mountain range, and we won our right of way. Now there is another payment to be made on our freedom of movement. It's the price for growing greater than our biggest dream. The way ahead, is it to be a dead end or the green light?
Don't honk your horn. Raise your voice. Ask for better highways and more parking space. It's your country. To get the green light, write your state capital. Write Washington, D.C. Write your hometown officials. Postcard your newspaper editor. Call your radio and TV commentators. Support your highway officials. And when you vote, vote for your right of way. Don't honk your horn.
Raise your
by
voice.
General Motors.
It's your country.
I was right.
Yeah.
By the
Our
way,
nation.
there was a red car clip that was also in the automat from this film.
Yeah, it's quite a film. I love how it links our highway, our freedom to drive, to manifest destiny, to fighting wild animals, to displacing Indians. Every time we get in a car and go across country, we're kind of reliving, we're reenacting manifest destiny. We're reenacting
duty.
The conquest of the continent. It's an interesting film. It is not a simple thing when we get in the car to go somewhere, is it? And that, this is why I like these films. Okay, Peter and Lisa, these films interrupt the seamless thread of everyday life. They're what I call, they defamiliarize everyday life. They make what we think of as familiar look a little bit strange. They interrupt our complacency, perhaps. We get, at best, if we think a little bit, these films can help us. For years, I thought, okay, these films are great. They document the persuasions of the past. They tell us how we were told to do things. They tell us what the elites wanted us to do. And over the past few years, I've come to look at them actually a little differently. These films are actually weapons. These films are weapons of mass persuasion. And they're weapons that were deployed for very specific purposes. The money that was spent on Give Yourself the Green Light was spent, to gain profits for auto companies, because they knew that if there were more roads, there would be more cars and people would drive more. These are documents that they just interrupt the flow of daily life, and at best they can get us to think a little bit, and that's how I hope we can use them.
The corporate agenda of highway building and that form of transportation was promoted. GM started with its Futurama. What was it?
Futurama and World's Fair.
Yeah, Futurama 39, right? Which was building on kind of all of the suburbs and housing legislation. And then they continued that. We don't have the clip here, but of course, they continued that into 64. The 39 Futurama was very clear about roads. By 64, they started losing their way, and it was suggesting life underwater, life outer space.
On the moon.
And my favorite one, which you didn't have in your clip, was we're going to have to tame the rainforests because they're wild down there in Brazil. So there was a giant machine that went through the rainforest, and it ingested trees on one side and spit out paved highways on the other because it was progress. Like Robert Moses or anything else thinks that there was a very reasonable national development thing to start with, and then it kind of metastasized. I mentioned to you that I used some of your footage and stuff I did at Apple and for Bill Gates. In 1993, we were not really talking about the internet yet. We were talking about the information superhighway. We knew that broadband was coming, but we thought it was going to be a private thing. The open internet still was for the government and for research. So Microsoft and AT&T and everybody was going to work on the information superhighway, which was their version of going and building that. And I was working with Bill in 93 on his book, The Road Ahead, which was his version of like, here's what's going to come next.
Yeah, I remember.
And he'd seen a bunch of the videos I'd done at Apple. And so for various reasons, I ended up doing stuff for him. And he said, here was his communications problem. He said, I'm going to Warren Buffett's conference. It was the first time that Bill went to Warren Buffett's conference. And he's like, I'm nervous because they're going to think I'm like a tech geek, and they're not going to understand because, how do I make all these business people comfortable with all this new technology stuff? And I'm like, well, explain that you don't fully know where it's going either. You have a sense of humor, and just explain that throughout history, we've made new technology and some of it sticks to the wall and some didn't. And that's the path we're on. So to do that, I got a hold of a bunch of your footage and decided to do something that would explain our current mission, the information superhighway, in terms of the continual history, the 20th century of just trying new forms of media and see what would work. So I'm going to play this clip now because we just looked at the films about making a highway. I want to share with you one about making a superhighway. Okay, Omid, let's take a look at this.
The pyramids, the Colosseum, the New York subway system, and TV dinners. Ancient and modern wonders of the man-made world all. Yet each pales to insignificance with the completion of that magnificent accomplishment of 21st century technology, the digital superhighway. Once it was only a dream of technoids and a few long-forgotten politicians. The digital highway arrived in America's living rooms late in the 20th century. Let us recall the pioneers who made this technical marvel possible. The digital highway would follow the rutted trail first blazed by Alexander Graham Bell. The world and all its culture reduced to bits, the lingua franca of all media, and the forces of conscience excluded. Finally, four great industrial sectors combined: telecommunications, entertainment, computing, and everything else. Entrepreneurs launched a rigorous search for new media applications.
My good friend Bill Gates came to see me a while back, and he had a list, 3 pages long, single-space, double lines of services that he thought we ought to explore together.
In the frenzy for digital dominance, alliances were formed.
Columbia has sold itself to Sony for more than $3 billion.
Time Incorporated and Warner Communications.
$2.5 billion in Time Warner.
QVC Network has proposed a merger with $12.5 billion to buy McCaw Cellular Communications.
Viacom, the company behind MTV and Nickelodeon, is buying Paramount Communications.
Bethlehem Steel became Bethlehem Steel and Entertainment. Chrysler changed its name to Chrysler Studios. And Weight Watchers launched the virtual eating channel.
We'll see channels for the gourmet, and we'll see channels for the pet lover.
Next on the Gourmet Pet Channel, decorating birthday cakes for your schnauzer.
All of industry was in play as investors flocked to place their bets. At stake, the battle for you, the consumer, and the right to spend billions to send a flood of information into the parlors of America.
With an information highway across the USA, and everybody be shopping in a whole new way. See the stuff on your TV and use your credit card. It's like having a strip mall in your own backyard. So catch an old movie, play a video game, watch Punch and Judy, it's all the same. But digital convergence can bring it all to you, and it must be progress, 'cause it's all brand new. You can do your banking, and you can buy your stocks. You can order pizza with your TV box. You can meet a friend now, start a relationship. Cyberpunk teenagers say it's really here. Well, they wanna make money, and they hope they can. If enough subscribers pay the highwayman. Well, tune in tomorrow, and we're sure you'll see that the future's out there, and so are we. Well, the future's out there, and so are we. Well, the future's out there, and so are we.
Oh my.
You must have had fun making that.
Oh my God, that was so much fun.
Why didn't you continue and be a video producer for the rest of your life?
I could. There's
I think you are.
Rick, we're on television right now.
It's true. That's right. We're in chopped liver. It's depressing, though, and you think about all those media mergers and how few of them ever actually really worked out. Much better to control the operating system layer.
One of the interesting things about that is to think through what we got right and what we got wrong. So in general, we got right that stuff would be broadband. We completely thought it would be controlled by a company. The idea that it would be an open internet, we missed. No user generated anything. It was all going to come down the wire. We missed open source user generated content, all the stuff that you were talking about earlier. Nobody had a clue on that.
Yeah. No, sure. I know they're still doing it too now. We have this new wave of media concentration because everybody's fighting for online and on demand. And we've got all these systems, walled gardens. And who wants to subscribe to 10 different video services, right?
No.
Yeah, I don't subscribe to any of them.
It's very interesting to see the unraveling of one aggregation mechanism, the re-raveling of another.
Yes.
I've been living through this because I decided I got fed up with Comcast. Because I realized if I just got an ISP, got a VoIP phone, and then got anything I wanted to be cheaper. But then what I realized was suddenly if you have like a Roku and a subscription to this, you're having to put everything together. It's in all sorts of places, right? It's interesting, right? It's a deaggregation, a reaggregation moment.
The one thing that's great in points of media transition, like we're having now, is lots of media gets thrown away. I began collecting film in 82, 83 when we were moving from film to video. And people that started collecting VHS, there's these big VHS archives now that are forming. Started collecting them when we moved to like file-based media, digital media. So there's opportunities for archives, except now there's so much media being created, it's impossible to even collect more than a fraction of it. Where do we go? I want to tell you about Lost Landscapes.
Yes, so we're about to do that. Let's go on to that right now. I have a clip from Kansas, and then we're going to run Lost Landscapes. So let's talk about home movies.
Home movies are very special. Home movies are infinite, and home movies often look the same. We must have 1,000 Christmases, not as many Hanukkahs. But what's interesting about home movies is that they're personal expression. They're not corporate expression. They're made by people who love what they're filming. Very, very rarely do people ever make films about things they don't like. Home movies are permeated with love, with attraction, with fascination. And there are these amazing records of everyday life. Home movies, as we know them, begin about 1923, and they end sometime in the 80s, and we moved to home video, which is much the same, but also different. And I have become almost exclusively focused on home movies. It's cinema for me. I honestly don't care about that much else anymore. Home movies are endlessly fascinating, and they're an incredible record. And starting in the 90s, I began showing films to people about the places they lived. And then in San Francisco in 06, I began doing these urban history films. And I know the first clip you want to show is this amazing clip from Kansas, which we could run if you like.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is a clip from a town on US 50 called Moran, Kansas, which is a town that's pretty dead. And my hypothesis is that little boy is the son of the children of these elderly people, but I'm not sure they're that elderly. They came out, they've survived the Dust Bowl, and I think that their children, who we don't see, who are making the movie, went to California, and this little boy who's kind of dressed like a dude is a little Californian, and these are the parents, and they know that movies are supposed to move, and so they're kind of they're doing the beautiful zombie stride here. And but I mean, look at this. This is the photographs of Dorothea Lange and Walker Evans come to life.
It sure is.
This is somebody's 8mm home movie from 1942. And this looks like it's a selection from Lost Landscapes. This is a kind of nondescript clip, but these are National Guard soldiers. This is the only existing home movie that I've been able to find of the 1934 general strike, which shut San Francisco down for about a week. And that's why it's there. This is part of my urban history event. This is VJ Day in San Francisco, the end of World War II. People are celebrating kind of a riotous celebration that actually caused a bunch of people died. But so I do this show every year, like 1,400 people come each night for 2 nights. And it's mostly silent. The audience talks through the movie. And this is my great discovery, although it's not my own discovery. But what if you make a movie where the closure doesn't happen in the movie? The closure happens outside the theater, where people talk their way through the movie. They ask questions, they talk to each other, they engage in arguments and disputes, they recognize things, they name things. It's a wild room, and I just love participatory cinema that isn't about technology in particular. That doesn't happen in a browser or that doesn't happen in an app. It's an amazing experience, and it doesn't suit everything, But I think
this footage is also so amazing because San Francisco's always having a discussion about its future.
That's
and
right.
How dense it should be and who should be there and is it a city? And when you go back and you look at some of this older stuff, it really felt like a very dense city then. And it's almost amazing to be reminded how cityish we have been.
And we can't go back. We can't recover what isn't there anymore. But we can design mindfully, and we could think about what sort of community we want to foster. Everybody talks about how crowded Market Street is and how full of life Market Street is in these old films. There's the Twitter building, by the way, on the right, the Merchandise Mart, today's Twitter building. But what people don't realize is the reason that Market Street is so empty now is because we don't have small businesses. We have these large inhospitable buildings, and we've done a bad job of urban space in our most impressive street. So this can remind us of possible futures that we find allusions to in the past. And that's what I think is exciting about this stuff.
You're saying there's not enough storefronts on Market Street?
Yeah, Market Street has become just these, there's these large buildings with a lot of glass and a lot of big entrances and a lot of private space, but it isn't space where you want to hang out. It's not space. Right. It's not like La Rambla, or Broadway, where you come to look at your friends, come to see your friends. It's space you walk through or drive through or cycle through.
I've done a bunch of work with the city, and we also did. Do you remember the urban Market Street prototyping project we did on Market Street a few years ago?
Yeah, we were involved. We brought a library out there.
Right, and the whole purpose, that was a project that was doing, in order to get people to dwell more and spend more time on Market Street, how do you make it interesting and how do you speed that stuff up? So there's a lot of temporary prototypes. Your footage was inspirational in that because it gave people the realization of what it could be. It gave permission to realize that there were things that went on there that might go on there. And by the way, neon, tell us the story about the neon there.
Oh boy, I mean, Chinatown always prided itself on neon. People would come to Chinatown for the signs as much as they would come for the food in the stores. It's people writing words and pictures and images on the sky. And these films actually are great documentation of neon. Here's North Beach when it was still kind of bohemian. And it's just somebody shooting out their car window. It's just an amazing record. I love the granularity of this record, that you can see individual stores, you can see people's faces, you can see what they're wearing. This is, and I think I would hope that that we all think about cities a little bit
I mean,
different.
hold it right there. We'll get to this clip in a moment. Go ahead, Rick.
I would hope that we all just feel that we have a sense of agency regarding the places we live. That it isn't just up to planners who are largely fulfilling corporate or developer agendas. That we can have something to say about the places we live.
Yeah, that was the whole concept of prototyping, which is
Totally.
to let people come up with things, and you could argue that it was the lack of engaging citizens in their future that tanked Amazon going to New York, and certainly helped tank the sidewalk project that Google was doing in
Toronto.
Right?
Yeah, yeah.
And
people love theme parks, but they don't want to live in them. They don't want the experiences all designed for them.
I didn't hear about this Canadian Google project.
So Google created a smart cities group that wanted to go work on kind of all the efficiencies you could do in cities, and they wanted to do a project in a city. So they struck a deal with the Port of Toronto to redevelop a part of town and put in kind of all sorts of more advanced, smarter technology. So automated delivery things and roads that melted water and a bunch of great improvements. But such a development would also gather a fair amount of data, right? And because smart cities gather data, and so the question became: was Google going to be somehow learning all about us and doing things to us? Or would we be in control of our own destiny? Not unlike, was Robert Moses building highways around us? Oh, good. This is, we're pulling up a sidewalk lags thing. So it became quite a big project, but a lot of opposition came up unexpected, not unlike the opposition to the Amazon project in New York. Kind of people didn't expect that sense of backlash, but AOC had been elected. The people in Bronx were empowered, and people voted speaking up. The same thing happened in Toronto, but a lot around data privacy and sovereignty, and Google would tell you they had lots of community meetings and they did things, but it was not. It wasn't like an organic thing that started in the community that got to design it all.
And the Google folks, there's so many geniuses who work at Google. They're legitimately geniuses. They do amazing work, but they're not people. They don't know how to talk to folks on the street.
And what was in it for Google?
I think Google would be able to, by understanding people's movements and people's activities, they would be able to ultimately target advertising at them, deliver services and target advertising that was customized. If you know everything about somebody, then you're like their best friend, and you can your relationship with them is very valuable. You can monetize it.
Also, the data, if you're, so much of where cities are going are data oriented. So just think of the knowledge that Uber or Waze has about movements around town, right? That information is incredibly valuable to marshal public transit, or to do on-demand pricing, or to go find out where parking spots are. Google wanted to make a market to build a lot of that. You need huge amounts of data for automated vehicles. They need tons of bandwidth so they can talk to each other and understand things. So the idea of deploying that was what they were up to.
If you want to make your fortune, don't actually do something. Don't actually even create information. It's the metadata. It's the information about the information that's worth the most money. Don't start a TV network. Sorry, Peter. But be the person that controls the directory to the TV network. Be the person that controls the meta. Be the traffic cop. Be the repository of information. Control that layer, and you'll do very, very well. And I think that's what Google realizes, that there was a period, I think, in the 90s or in the early 2000s where the digital model of Detroit, like Google Maps, was probably more valuable than a lot of the property in Detroit. And it created the digital model, made the property more valuable.
We did a show, we actually have done 2 shows in Quarantime on digital twins. So these days, it's very valuable to build up a digital replica of your city so you can stress test it, and in a disaster, how will people move around? How does transportation work?
You have to pay rent to live there?
Huh?
Do you have to pay rent to live in the digital twin?
It raises all those questions.
Yeah.
Who has access to it? Who owns it? What are the governance issues?
It's like a real Second Life.
Exactly. I want to be mindful of people's time.
Sure.
This show often keeps going, but tell me what time, how long each of you have, because Lisa, I'd love to dig into the process of making your film and when we get to see it and what it's been like to.
Let's do a 30-second thing on Lost Landscapes, and then it's Lisa's time.
Well, we have plenty of Lost Landscapes. So Rick, how long, when does everybody have to leave?
I listen to what Lisa has to tell us, and then I got to go.
Okay. Well, so let's talk about Lost Landscapes next week. Tell us how to find it and what to look forward to.
It'll still be there. Yep.
But you have a show on Tuesday, right? Wednesday?
I've got a show on the Long Now Foundation. You can go to longnow.org and you can find out about the Wednesday evening webcast of Lost Landscapes. And you can talk back on the chat. So come visit. It's free.
This will be your first one that's not in the theater.
Yeah. Sadly.
Which is actually a fascinating transition to Lisa, because you have a documentary which would be fabulous on not the theater, but you want to wait till we go back to a theater to experience your show.
Well, like with the Automat, I'm all about the in-person experience and the interaction, and that's much more valuable to me than just getting it out there. And I think that if Rick were to not put his show out this year, then he'd get behind a year or something. Like, I'm not going to have another documentary next year, so it's not a big deal for me to just put it off. So I see why Rick is doing it, virtual and all. It's just, I don't have another show next year.
How did you go from, I really liked cafeterias, to I'm making a documentary?
Well, it didn't start out that way. It was just an interest at first, and I was just reading and collecting information and collecting books and meeting people. But I started visiting archives, and once I saw what there was in archives and that people weren't, yes, people have done stuff with, there's a lot of, for example, in stock footage libraries, for example, there's a lot of footage that, we've seen a lot. And at that point, I didn't realize how much stock footage there was that we hadn't seen yet. But at that point, I was just really seeing photos in archives at museums and libraries that hadn't been made public yet, or the public hadn't seen it in too many decades. So it just seemed to me like such a gold mine, because here you have a subject matter that people feel really fondly about, and then to make it even better, you've got a visual treasure trove, and much more than I had even realized at the get-go.
And in addition to archival stuff, did you do interviews and kind of digging up memories and stuff?
Yes. So at first, there was a lot of interviewing kind of regular people, customers, and it became it got a little more sophisticated. You started getting to the executives of Horn and Hardart, and then big celebrities and politicians, and that's where we ended up. So yeah, a lot of memories, and it's sort of a traditional documentary in the sense that you've got a lot of talking heads, people who are sharing their stories, and then we show different archival footage, and that was the way that this film was done. I don't know that that's how I would do my next film, but yeah.
Did you find a lot of footage that was directly Automat related?
So much. And I've been hoarding it a little bit, not in such a terrible way, but other people have worked on projects since I began, and I don't want them to know you know, my film's not out yet. I would like to be able to debut the stuff that I have found that hasn't really been unearthed. Yeah, it's amazing. And there's got to be so much more stuff that we never even found. But just when I started the film, I felt like archives were becoming more digitized. So I started around 2013. And it was incredible how much stuff ended up going online between, if I had finished the film in like 2014, for example, so much stuff wouldn't have made it in because I never would have found it because it never would have made it online. But that was definitely something really interesting. It's kind of hard to imagine to make this film like 20 years ago. How could you have done that without the internet? Because the internet was such a resource. But even with the internet, you still have to dig a lot because a lot of stuff isn't really tagged. So yeah, I would, at a certain point though, it's, you know, I was ready to stop searching, but I'm sure that so much more stuff is going to surface.
I was going to ask you how you found this stuff, but now I feel like that's a trade secret and we shouldn't discuss it till the film.
It's not a trade secret. I'm just not going to tell you the clip name, real number, and website.
Did stuff come from? Was it home movies or actually things in archives or like industrial films? What are the kinds of things that documented it?
I did put shout outs for home movies. Like I was running Facebook ads trying to get people to send me their home movies. Wow. But that just turned up like some photos and it got like people started following the film. But the only like home movies that I found were movies belonging to the Horn family or the Hard Art family.
Oh, good.
Things that the executives hung on to. I mean, there was some great, really incredible film that the families were able to locate that made it into the film. But a lot of stuff was just spread out everywhere at different film archives and stock footage libraries, and photos were spread everywhere. Stock footage library, everything was really spread out with the different like commercial stock footage libraries. And then of course, you find stuff at National Archives, and there's so much stuff I'm sure at National Archives that isn't tagged that we didn't find.
Yeah, most of it's not even digitized yet. You can't see it.
Yeah, I just remember, like, for example, I was at National Archives and watching some newsreels. I think they were like Fox newsreels, and just not because it was tagged, but all of a sudden we were driving past an automat, and it was just like coincidence, this pure coincidence. And so, if that could happen, it definitely could have continued happening because they were, it was like Starbucks. They were all over the place. If you're driving around New York City, you were definitely going to be driving past them. But I mean, like Rick had footage that he put up on Internet Archives and gave to.
Yeah, you wrote me about that.
What?
You wrote me about that, and I said sure.
Yeah. There were frustrating moments too, because like. What's the name of that really cool archive that belonged to, he passed away recently, in San Francisco? Oddball. Like
Steve Parr.
Yeah.
Parr. Yeah.
Yeah. So he had like some really amazing stuff that I was talking to him about when he was alive, and then after he died, I felt like I really got like gouged for it by his colleagues, and it was just it's painful.
No comment.
Then we get into the licensing aspect of things, which is it's astronomical when you add everything up. And if you consider like somebody like Getty, Getty has the bulk of it. That's if you make a pie chart of who had everything. So it's you make a document. It's really financially incredible. It's such an amazing accomplishment if you can make a historical documentary independently without, I mean, PBS is, I think, less of a huge player right now than it was in the past, but to do it independently and to license everything, it's just, it's pretty unbelievable.
Rick, do you find that, with the exception of like your archive, the historical licensing thing it adds a lot of friction to what filmmakers would like to do?
There's a lot of people who make archival films, who make many archival films, and so they have staff and they have relationships and researchers who work with them, and they're able to grease the skids a little bit. But it's a pain. When I used to sell stock footage actively, we're now repped by Getty. Although, as I said, people can download stuff for free in pretty decent res. But when I sold footage, I tried to get as high a price I could, and I never let anything out without time code superimposed. Yes. And I was totally COD. If somebody wanted to use material, they had to send me a check before I gave them a license, because filmmakers like to pay net 180, and so, but on the other hand, we always gave away footage to community makers, to artists, to independents, to students, and kind of, making starting the path to put things online. But it's hard, especially if it's your first film, and you're coming at it new and you don't have the relationships, and you might not have $1 million in your pocket to just buy everything.
I'm sure that I still probably spent a fraction, if this was a PBS production, that for what I licensed, they probably would have paid for it. PBS probably would have paid 3 or 4 times as much, because I just was so desperate and begging. Some people like Oddball wouldn't relent, but
interesting.
It really did take away the joy from and I can't blame people who have to charge. They're trying to make a living too, but I mean, I think there's a reason that if you look at the kinds of documentaries that, I mean, I have very mixed feelings about all of it, because like, while I love this film, it's like super niche. And so you're pouring all these resources into something that, can it really sell in the end? And so, I mean, you do it for love, but it would be if it's expensive to make these kinds of historical documentaries. So if I were to do a historical documentary again, I probably would try to somehow make it more broad, but it's kind of hard to imagine. How can you even make like the Automat to me seems so broad. You really just have to try to, I think that there isn't really money to be made anymore in historical documentaries, in the sense of like what I tried to do here. I think we've kind of moved on to something that's more sexy in terms of the kinds of documentaries that, people.
So what's your next project then?
Well, I'm writing a script for a romantic comedy. It's not a documentary, but it's
no archival footage.
No archival footage, but
that's a given if it's going to be romantic.
For I think about 8 years now, so ready for. Want to try something different, but I don't know that I would ever, because I was the archival supervisor for my film. I don't think I can ever really do that again, because it was pretty soul sucking. Although it also would have I know that I negotiated the best price that existed on the face of the planet, and nobody else could have done that. So, I mean, I think I also would have I also would have been in pain having known that I, maybe overpaid. So I'm a bit of a weirdo.
This conversation does an amazing job of exposing the visceral sense of what you went through and what it's like pulling out from archives, like pulling teeth to get this stuff and make your finances work out.
Well, yeah, I think that it's like a lot more. It all looks a lot prettier when you hire people to do it, and they just get it done, and they're not as it's not their funds that are being spent.
You were asking about the experience of doing stuff at Apple and Microsoft, Rick. One of the nice things was generally you could go pay to go get stuff. So when I was doing that, like that thing you saw before, we decided we might need some Marshall McLuhan footage. And back then, there was one place that was selling like cassettes, and the cassettes were like $2,000 if you wanted the set of the cassettes, even to look at them. So like 8 people had the cassettes of Marshall McLuhan. So we got a set of everything of Marshall McLuhan, which was like great.
Wow.
And then at Apple, it's at some point in persuading Apple, I kind of went on from using archival footage to we were writing like original comedy stuff. So we would hire either actors or even like our mutual friend Marlene, who was doing a graphic design for Saturday Night Live. We just hired her to make up fake products and do stuff at Apple. We do musicals, and then eventually realize you're in the marketing department, but you're actually a little vertically integrated studio, and you have to stop doing that after the sales conference and go back to work.
Do your job. Yeah, go back to your job.
Yeah.
Cool.
We should probably wrap up here because we're arriving. Your candles have burned down, and thank you. This was so much fun.
Thank you, Peter. That was great.
We're gonna tune in on it's Wednesday night, right?
It's Wednesday night. I believe it's 5 p.m. I can tell you. It's Wednesday night, 5 p.m. Go to Long Now Foundation to register, longnow.org, free registration. And then we can all talk on chat. I'm hoping there's going to be a couple thousand people, and I'm hoping we're going to have smoke and chat.
And here's our co-host, Mickey McManus.
Hey, Mickey.
Hey, how you doing? I'm so sorry I missed both of you. I was listening to you on the car on the way here and tuned in, but I had a much longer dentist appointment than I thought I'd have. Rick, thank you so much for coming on. And Lisa, it's really amazing. It's been so fun listening about the automat. So I'm just the overtime segment here. I had a question for Peter and then Lisa. Peter, did you ever visit an automat when you were a kid? You've got to be like 117 years old or something like that. You grew up in New York?
So, I moved to New York when I was like 7 or 8. And my mother had to sell me in New York because I'd grown up in Chicago. The automat was a big part of the sell job, right? Like,
oh, really?
Chicago, so we had to go to New York. No, they were, and Lisa's right about the experience. I mean, first of all, I don't know if I realized I was doing something retro, but it was very cool, and there was a vibe in that space that was unique. And the pie was good.
Yeah, we went in. We would have we would come in. I grew up in Connecticut, and we'd go to the Metropolitan Opera. Get in a big train car, all the schools in Connecticut, and we go to the automat. I remember roast beef sandwich, 55 cents.
All I remember. So I was a Chicago kid, and I don't remember an automat. But I'm a product designer, so I grew up. Sort of fascinated by shiny chrome things, in the 1950s, like toasters and other things. And there was a period right after World War II where everything was going to be automated. And so in my other little tiny house, I have a canomat, which is a chrome thing to actually you crank a big crank and it opens up your cans. There is an isomat, and it's actually to grind your ice. I've got a toast-o-later where you put toast on one side and then you turn it on and it moves through a little window in the chrome to see it actually on a conveyor belt as it toasts, and then it falls over automatically onto your plate. These are like, there's a whole collection of things that were about o-matic or o-later because that was the future. And so I think I'm sure I saw some documentary about the automat, or maybe just footage, the footage that you'd always see, or maybe TV show when I was a kid. And it was just like, oh my God, it's like the future.
There's
and
some
then,
movies. It shows up in the movies, but
it shows up in the movies. Maybe that's it. Yeah.
We can't mention any names.
But the funny thing is, to me, there was a period of time when people started, you guys were talking earlier about, own the metadata, or what Google's doing and stuff. And I don't want to get into the big do no evil companies that seem to be strip mining our cognition and everything right now. But what I would like to say is, though, early on at Maya, at our research labs, we did an initiative, a research initiative called Idle Human Initiative, the Idle Human Initiative, IHI. And this was very early days. And a few years later, they came out with Mechanical Turk on Amazon, where basically it looks like it's an automation process, but really it's people behind the scenes getting paid like $5 to, read your transcript and type it up or create a diagram for you. And it seems to me like Automat might have been the first Mechanical Turk beyond the original Mechanical Turk.
There was something enticing and naughty about looking through the holes in the automat and seeing the people behind there, because you always felt like you weren't supposed to see the people behind there. And at times you'd go and get your thing of peas and you couldn't, because somebody's hand was putting peas in there. And that was just
nice.
You kind of realized it was like you were looking at a stage.
So I used to work for HBO, and one of my housemates had worked for HBO for many, many years, and he said that at the very beginning, when it was Sterling Cable just serving a few hotels in New York City and showing movies that nobody watched, and that the engineers would sometimes just look through the projector at the camera so people would see a giant eyeball on their TV screen, if anybody was even watching.
Lisa, I'm curious. I didn't get to interview you, and I apologize for that. But maybe I'm just curious about. Alec Schuldiner is a good friend of mine who wrote his PhD thesis about the automat, and he's the one who connected us. And I'm curious. If you were able to harvest anything from what Alec wrote his PhD thesis, or if there were like parts and pieces you could steal from that. I just thought that was fascinating, that somebody that I know from some entirely different world, how to make a bridge that wakes up and actually fixes it, which is what Alec and I were working on. How much did you take advantage of that, or was it more just happenstance?
Well, Alec wrote the history that then everyone started regurgitating and making into their own, telling it slightly differently. So Alec pulled together all the different sources. So the history, as we all know it, is, in my opinion, thanks to Alec. So that definitely has a huge influence on anyone who's, tried to tell the story of Horn and Hard Art. But then I'd say the biggest influence really was that he's always been a sounding board and a collaborator, and someone who I could verify my ideas with, and just make sure that everything was historically correct. And, Alec wasn't interested in photos or film. If you go through all of his research, like I did, because I got his boxes of research from his dissertation, there's hardly any images in it. It's a lot of text, and the photos that are in there are bad photocopies that never were intended to be printed.
Just sort of bolstering his stuff. Yeah.
To a certain extent, I was able to, if I saw an image that I sort of liked, I could try to go, track it down that he had originally found. But we both had different kind of objectives. I was telling more of like a social history, and he was really more interested in the data and really facts. There's a lot of, the film is full of a lot of stories, personal anecdotes, and feelings. At the end of the day, like, one of the strengths of the film, or one of the things people have, the film's not out yet, but some people have seen the film in the film world, and people are saying that it's a special film. It's a lovely film, and I don't think that you would necessarily describe the PhD dissertation in that way. It's just they're two different beasts, and I think something that sets this documentary maybe apart from other historical documentaries is that we really gave an inanimate object kind of like a heart, and we made it its own person, and we made like a love story about not a person but about a thing, and we tried to make it a historical documentary that would appeal to a larger age range and people who didn't necessarily have firsthand experience eating at an automat. So
what are you most proud of, Lisa? Just in terms of because it sounds like it was an epic lift, particularly the getting the archive footage and things, but it sounded like some amazing stuff from the family and other things. What are you most proud of in terms of just the whole arc of going through this journey?
Well, I feel really proud that we preserved the story. We found as many of the original sources as we could, and we pulled them all together into one place, and that will live on. And I think bring people joy, and to be able to make people happy. I feel really proud about that, and I feel proud about. It's pretty bold to be reaching out to strangers. Like Alec was just somebody he was a stranger who I and to kind of insert yourself into people's lives and to be able to win people over and get people to help you and to create an amazing collaboration of strangers and create a community. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of social media, but I am proud of the community that we have created on social media around Horn and Hard Art. It's like the exception that I make for social media. You're
willing to do it. Yeah. Well, it feels like it's probably taken on a life of its own, or it will take on a life of its own after it gets out there too. You sort of did it, and you want to move to your next adventure. You were talking about a scripted.
I'm gonna have to actually move to my next adventure, unfortunately.
Yep. Rick, thanks for coming. 20 years of the Prelinger archives. Is it
20 years of the
online?
20 years. We went online at the very end of 2000. Lisa, congratulations! I can't wait. Let me know when we see it in San Francisco. We'll be in touch. Thank you, Mickey.
We will
Thank
all
you,
show
Peter.
up.
This was awesome.
Rick, we will continue this. I will see you on the internet next week.
I'm always there.
For your show, and then let's continue this. There's so much to talk about. Thank you.
I'm curious, Rick. Thank you very much. I want to pick Lisa's brain for a little bit longer. If you're okay with
what
that.
do I do here? Do I just stop cam?
Just close the.
You can't stop it. It's the internet. It does not go away.
All right.
Well,
Thank you. Good to see you all.
Bye. We almost caught Rick proving that it's not an ephemeral medium. Welcome, Mickey. I'm glad you could make it, and you listen to the radio.
Lisa, we realized that
Alec was going to be on the show too.
I know. If he would show up, we would take him. The interesting thing about Alec is that when I moved from the farther east, Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon area to here to San Francisco, and I began this sort of exit level internship that I was doing at this place here that Alec worked at. He was the first person that sort of just adopted me. Like he's like, now tell me what you're doing exactly. Oh, I read your book. Oh, okay. Yes. Can I work on your project? And I was like, wait, can I work on your project? Like, what are you
Yeah.
doing? And
Yeah, he's just
I
like
think
a
that
project
really,
person. I hope that I stay a project person. I'm a little nervous because this was like a project that I was working on for many, many years, and
Yeah.
I've got to figure out my next project, you know?
I think, what's beautiful about that is you don't have to do a project after project after project. I think you can have a refractory period where you just chill out a little bit, or don't expect that much, because you did an epic lift. I mean, I'm so excited by this, and I think it's going to take on a life of its own beyond what you could imagine. And
Well, even if
then
it
you're
does,
going to want to be like, okay, go. I want to do something else, and that's okay. We have to give ourselves space.
well, thank you. I like, or I appreciate your optimism. Even if people don't all see it and everything, we know that we did something good.
You did. You
Yeah,
did. Yeah. And everything I've read about it so far, and even what Alex told me, it just sounds, and he's so proud of what you've done and all the work. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So,
huge.
Tell me what you do to get your brain out of it. Like, what kind of hobbies do you have? What do you do to like kind of disconnect from all this craziness in terms of like thinking about your next script, or thinking about what's going on with Automat? What do you do to disconnect?
Well, the Automat is a hobby because it's not my job.
Yeah.
So the Automat has been kind of a way to disconnect. In addition to that, up until recently, I had a dog who passed away this year at a very nice old age. So I'm pretty, I wouldn't say I don't really have such crazy. I mean, the filmmaking thing is like my wackiest hobby,
That's awesome, though. Yeah, no, that's awesome. I mean, it's like crazy. I've never made a film in my life. It sounds amazing.
Well, you should save up first.
Yeah, no. Well, it's interesting. I was on the board of directors for the first public television in the country, the one that had this thing called Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And Mr. Rogers would come in occasionally, and his wife, and he's actually the real deal. He was the real deal. He would come to art openings. He would be there, and he was just genuine. And Michael Keaton was one of the puppeteers in the original Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and you could go downstairs in WQED in Pittsburgh, and you could actually see the entire set, of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And I think I just fell in love at a very young age because of Sesame Street. When I was 5, it premiered or something. I fell in love with public television and the documentaries, like just the amazing things that we do that's sort of 90 degrees to trying to sell something, that's actually about literacy. And when we became board members a long time back, when I became a board member, they required us to read the congressional document that created the Center for Public Broadcasting. And the document that said there's this new medium called television. And we need some form, a way to actually help citizens become literate about this new medium. And it's actually a beautiful document. It's bipartisan, 1950s, 60s, that created PBS and created a way to scale it. Mr. Rogers and WQED was around actually 10 years before that, and there were different public stations, but it gave energy, and it's fought a lot of battles lately because society isn't sure if they care about literacy or arts or that sort of stuff, and often at the federal level and the state level, these things get zeroed out funding wise. So I'm a big fan, and Peter, of course, has had Marshall McLuhan on a number of times, and Marshall McLuhan's grandson, who's still alive. So Peter likes to have dead guests on our show a lot, and believes deeply in the medium is the massage. It's massaging us all the time into a different state. Lisa, what's your take on this moment? Something like the Automat is happening, In other words, the children today, the young innovators today are creating something that 70 years from now, some Lisa, of the future will want to share that story. What do you think's happening right now that like someday you're going to hope somebody does a documentary of?
Gosh, what is the incredibly optimistic, innocent, wholesome, not greedy thing that's bubbling right now? I don't really know.
It's hard to say. I'm just curious. Peter, what do you think?
Well, so the blunt answer of the moment would be chronicling all of the ways that this automated stuff that we're building is unserving us, right? Because we're having this kind of moment in Silicon Valley where we're deeply concerned about bots, business models, the fact that technologies that are designed to bring us together are pulling us apart and all that stuff. But to Lisa's point, and to a theme that went through today, what is that optimistic tomorrow that actually is achievable, that we're heading towards, because we've got new ways of doing things, which in and of itself could then empower us and give us agency to go create that. And you and I have spoken about this on the show, but the fact that we're moving towards things like sustainable manufacturing, working with nature, all of the kind of bio-nature stuff we've talked about, I think there's a set of developments that are going on that are hitting the marketplace and suggest that the major things we try to do that tend to be extractive of both minerals and materials, but also of our minds, that we're finding ways to actually surmount that. And I don't think that story's been connected or told because it's happening in so many places. And as Rick pointed out, there's noise. So to me, that's the great thing of the day. And then the question is, what's that medium? Is it a game? Is it video?
Right. It's not going to necessarily be film or video
or it's a World's Fair, right?
Yeah.
So
I think it is. I mean, my bet would be on the world of play.
Yeah.
The stuff happening on Twitch, the 5-hour epic, crazy role-playing games with people rolling die on a real board, but actually posed completely in cosplay character, and like people talking back to them and telling them, "Oh, I think Cheryl's falling in love with Bob," and then the next episode, like Cheryl's suddenly falling in love with Bob, where the audience is talking back. Cheryl, who's now at the Gates Foundation, was on our show and talked about this crazy season where she called it the void spoke back, where thousands of people around the world were like building tribute Wikipedia pages to each of the characters that they were playing. And they were rolling die, and people online would pay to give you an extra die so that you could actually like have more luck as a princess or as a warrior, as a sorcerer. I don't even know where that's going. I felt very uncomfortable because I just didn't know. I don't know about Twitch and I didn't understand it. But I'm super excited by Minecraft and the fact that, if you watch the Minecraft release, which, was this little company in the Netherlands or whatever that got bought by Microsoft, just a few weeks ago on YouTube, it was like thousands of people, and they were like, "We've created a new level, and there's magic here." And I mean, it just seemed fun and crazy. So I wonder if hopefully play.
Yeah, I think you're right that it's going to have something to do with fun.
What we haven't told Lisa is that Quarantime is a secret research project to go figure this out, because we basically invite the most interesting people on every week and look at new technologies, new ideas. And the whole conceit of this was when the lockdown started, and all anyone was talking about was the governor was yelling at the president and there was no PPEs. Underneath that whole conversation, people were hard at work inventing really interesting things and thinking about this stuff. So that's...
Yeah, I think it's not so secret. It's just nobody actually watches us. I'm sorry about that, Lisa.
By the way,
we're just here by ourselves. But it is interesting. I mean, we had Steve Jurvetson on with Andrew Hessel, and Steve, obviously first investor in SpaceX, and they've done okay in Tesla. But his interesting story was Memphis Meats, which was motherless meats, and the ability of if we had a choice to eat, meat that never had a mother, that we never had to torture, that we never had to put in whatever, would we do it? Of course we would. Like we would, and so he only invests in inevitable. Would we get off the planet with reusable spaceships? Of course we would. And, I think sometimes, and Lisa, now you're part of our crew of evil secret researchers, trying to figure out how to actually look on the bright side and figure out how the productive struggle happens.
Which, by the way, is a teaser for what we believe to be next week's show, when we're going to look at two of the biggest ideas in America today.
Oh,
right. We'll be looking at.
Ideas? There are two ideas.
We have two. We have one that's from California and one from Pennsylvania. We're doing a show on Mayor Peduto of Pittsburgh, together with Mayor Whalen in Dayton and other leaders in the Midwest, have proposed the Marshall Plan for the Upper Midwest. So this is how does a whole region get together and transform its economy from more fossil-based to more just and green-based. But what that really means is, how do you literally provide jobs, whether it's in solar manufacturing or green manufacturing, for a lot of these people who've been displaced, including inner city people who couldn't imagine that they would actually have this, right? So it's a very big, almost WPA scale idea. And yet this is what happens when economies transform. And then, and so that's right. That's a, and on the same show, we're going to have the people who are working on California's biomanufacturing plan, right? Which is looking at synthetic biology for the manufacturing of the replacement of leather goods or brewing buildings or creating energy. But that's using this very interesting capacity. California is strong in agriculture, strong in bioscience, doing all this emerging stuff in synthetic biology and tech. If you bring that together, that could be very important for the economy. Those are kind of like.
Now, my understanding is John, who's going to come on from that standpoint, John Cumbers, who leads this beautiful global community called Synbio Beta. He's going to talk about, instead of brute forcing nature the way the last industrial revolution did, strip mine dinosaurs and use petroleum, how do we co-create with nature?
Yeah.
And it might be the only way. And COVID has accelerated that because of synthetic biology is actually might be our savior for the vaccine. Moderna actually had the design 2 months after the COVID virus was ripped, like a CD was ripped into the computer in December. In February, Moderna, who's a synthetic biology company, had the complete design for the vaccine that's actually getting rolled out. 2 months. Normally it takes 10 years. There are some crazy things if we actually co-design with nature. So I am excited about that. I don't quite know what it means. I'd like to know how it helps normal people find beautiful livelihoods in the future and actually nurture the planet. And I'm not even a real, green weenie, but I will tell you this. Here's the book I'm reading right now. The Soil Will Save Us. And it turns out that she makes the case, Kristen Olson makes the case that the soil is actually a stakeholder and doesn't have any rights. And that's a shame, because it's actually this crazy stakeholder at multi-level with nematodes and fungi and mycorrhizal networks and minerals, and it holds 3 times the carbon of air. And if we can actually put more carbon into the soil instead of just injecting it somewhere weird, it could save the planet. But we have to treat it like Whoville from Dr. Seuss. We have to actually think that there's an entire country beneath our feet. And it's this rich country. And I actually think it's sort of Gulliver's Travels to Whoville. Yeah. And we need to get passports to that country. And I'm super excited about that. Like, how do we become citizens of this crazy, it's insane, the amount of organisms beneath our feet. And when you see dust blowing away at the dust bowls in the 1920s, 30s, whatever, you see China facing, yellow fog every day because of all the soil eroding. That's because thousands of years of people taking the carbon out of the soil and trying to, even plowing is apparently terrible for the soil, and burning the stuff, after a harvest is terrible because you're breaking down this village that's Whoville. And so I'm very excited. I'm halfway through that book, and I'm hoping we can invite Kristen on. Lisa, What do you want to talk about? And we want to let you go too, because it's probably late. I don't know where you're even at. Are you in New York? East Coast or West Coast?
I'm in New York, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Well, it's very late. I'm already hitting the sauce because it's a Friday night.
Mickey, can I bring up a point of order here?
Well, I would just want to give Lisa a chance, like if she has any last words or anything that she just wants to share. I also want you to know that you can leave anytime, because Peter and I tend to never seem to know how to end, just like the quarantine.
Yeah, well, I'll shoot you an email, Mickey, because I know I caught you at the tail end, but I'm gonna connect with you, and thank you for inviting me onto the show. That was really sweet of you guys. I know I'm just a stranger, but not so stranger through Alec. But that was really nice of you. Thanks for including.
Yeah, but you're like the most awesome person I met this week. That's not chopped liver. That's pretty good. I'm so excited about Automat and just what I've heard about it and what I've seen online. I'm so glad you came.
Oh, thanks, Mickey.
You know, the one thing we haven't done today, do you know what we've left out?
No.
Mickey, we've left out our dead guest.
That's true. We haven't had a dead guest. Usually we have a dead guest.
It's true.
I know that sounds odd, Lisa. I apologize now.
We've had Marshall.
Who's our dead guest, Peter?
This week's dead guest is making a special appearance because he's focused on many of the things that were of interest to Lisa, how we can completely automate our food processes. And he actually was looking at how we could do them in our kitchens and at home in approximately the same era of the Automat. And we've not had him on before. I'm really excited to have Edward R. Murrow, one of America's founding broadcast journalists, on, and who in the 1950s wanted to go investigate the possibility of bringing automation to Milady's kitchen.
Really?
So let's take a look at Ed Murrow.
You're looking at General Electric's experimental XPC-1. The elevator you are looking at is not carrying jets up to the flight deck of the Forrestal, but shuttling candied yams from the freezing compartment to the oven of what General Electric hopes will be Milady's programmed cooker of the future. This is the prototype model, built at a cost of more than $150,000. It is both a freezer and a stove, in which the housewife stores frozen components of the various foods she thinks her family might like to eat. Each day, she punches up the evening meal on the scheduling panel. A half hour before serving time, the electronic timers take over. At H hour minus 30 minutes, the roast pork begins its automatic journey to the UHF oven. A mechanical muscle peels back the aluminum foil. At H hour minus 15 minutes, the yams are sent into action. At H hour minus 5 minutes, the rolls move into position. When the feedback mechanism indicates that everything is ready, a chime signals the completion of this combined operation. The inventors of this cybernetic chef point out that this is not intended to replace Mom's cooking. She can still prepare the food that the machine programs if she wishes.
Okay. Mechanical muscle.
That is some really complicated
knowledge.
technology.
I don't know if I could imagine a better video that met Mickey's interests in mechanical things and your
I love those push buttons. Like, I wish I had those push buttons today. Everything on the laptops and the phones all seem like they're like so touchy. It's like you go to pick something up and it pops out something, and I just want a big mechanical button I can push.
I wonder how far they got with that prototype.
Yeah. So I remember, Peter, your family was involved with Spiegel's catalog, and early on, and I remember you showed a picture on one episode of a kitchen island that was a personal computer.
Oh yeah,
from,
yeah. So that the connection here is I was in the board of the Computer History Museum, and when we started the Computer History Museum, it was generally a bunch of guys that grew up and they wanted to collect the hardware because those cool machines. And then there was a generation that wanted to collect the software so we could keep ancient software running and have it in the archive. And then I wanted to start collecting all of the stories, the marketing stories. How did we introduce things? What do we do? What Rick would call ephemeral film. And so we had to do an archiving thing. We literally had to call up everybody in Silicon Valley and get their videos and go back in history and get stuff. And so that's where all this, great, what did IBM do at the beginning? And that's where that Murrow thing came from, because it was part of automation. So in the course of that, just before there were personal computers of the Apple and Atari variety, there were mini computers that, like Data General and DEC made these things, and they cost like
but these are big. When they say mini computers, they were like, you could warm your family by them. Yeah.
Well, actually, it was the size of a microwave oven today, right? It was like, it wasn't a room size thing. That was a mainframe with a room. A mini computer, was like this big.
Okay.
Okay. So Data General made a really cool one that was like
were they tubes or were they transistors?
This is second generation transistor stuff. All so right. They were, and by the time you got out to mini computers, you're talking probably early integrated circuits, but not large scale integration. But on their way, right? Just because 6502 processors on their way. So Data General it was cool looking. It was like red and sloped, and you could have it in your house. And so Neiman Marcus, it was actually Neiman Marcus, famously this catalog with some, like twin platinum Rolls Royces. And so one year it was this beautiful computer with a woman who was like wearing a wonderful apron. And it's like, now you can have a computer for cooking. That was the good news. The bad news was there was no software. If you were going to use it for cooking, you have to write the code in assembly language because that's all that existed. And it was a completely preposterous proposition, but it anticipated that it might be a household device.
I want to have Julia Child on a future episode because she was actually one of my heroes. And not a lot of people know that she worked for the precursor to the National Security Agency during World War II and was one of the most, she had a very high security clearance during the war. And the reason she was in France had nothing to do with learning how to be a French chef.
Really?
And yeah. So there's an amazing backstory going on with Julia Child. And, they would make a radio station in the Philippines and other places. Her and her soon future husband, who was a propagandist / exhibit designer for the State Department, would make a radio station in the Philippines when Japan was trying to invade the Philippines that was just off the band of the normal Japanese radio station that was basically saying, we are invading you, we are winning, the Axis is going to win this world war. That was just slightly off, and it would have people that sounded like Japanese broadcasters basically saying, we're being routed, we're never going to make it, we're not going to be able to win the war. And so they did all this stuff around propaganda. Now later she became the French chef. But she was actually like one of the smartest people on the planet and super understood all sorts of interesting things. So I want her on a future episode. She's somebody who could have probably programmed that Neiman Marcus. I'm sorry that took a long time for me to get back to the kitchen robot. But anyway, let's put that in the bookmark. I want Julia Child on because she was my hero when I was growing up, and my mom was also a very tall woman. Who would just love having the French chef TV. Lisa,
thank you
very much for joining us. This was fun. What time is it, Peter?
It is right now 6:09 Pacific Quarantine. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.
Let's get close, but not so close. Quarantine. You can share from a distance. Quarantine. You know we want to see each other. You'll have to stay in your quarantine space while we talk.
Wow.
We are over.